Good afternoon. Thanks a lot for coming to this book launch of Rising Suns, a really stunning novel written by the wonderful and renowned writer Kaveri Nambishan. Just taking off from the trailer, I just thought I'll tell you a little bit about what this novel is before we begin our conversation. We go back 100 years back in time to a village called Kesaragat in Karnataka. And this is a village where rules of caste are sacrosanct. And we meet this family, and this is essentially the story of this one family headed by this patriarch, Devaraya, who has his wife, he lives with his wife, his two sons and two daughters. And is really this uptight man who, has these dreams for his family, but is short, doesn't really want to be, it's not a very expressive man, and so on. Now, a secret about Devaraya, about his past, comes back and sort of breaks this family and also causes a big stir in the village. In this secret also claims one of his sons. At the same time, this is also a time when the independence movement is gathering steam, and one of his other sons gets swept up in the independence fever. So what becomes of Devaraya's dreams, and what becomes of his dreams for his sons? And so this is essentially that story. I want to first begin with something that I heard in one of the sessions at JLF, actually. Charlotte Wood was talking about how every novel of hers is a reaction to her previous book. And Kaveri, you've written, this is your 7th novel. And I just wanted to ask you, is that true of you, of your writing as well, whether it is a reaction to your previous work? I guess what I'm asking is, where did the impetus for this novel come from?
All my novels seem to me, in hindsight, to be very different from each other. I never know the theme or the subject of the novel before I, decide that I'm going to write a novel. So for this one, it was a sort of a vague idea I had that of a young man from the South, a rural background, who finally moves and is swept into this independence movement and finally reaches Delhi. That vague idea was the only thing I had in me. And so I stayed with it for several years while I was working with a luxury called Health and the coffee book. Sorry. And subsequently, I thought of the village as the starting point and started writing about the village. The village itself is very, very small. It has only 57 families there. And then once I got caught up in that village, started building up that family, I got interested in what happens in a village. And from there, after, of course, a lot of things happen in the village, and then subsequently the sons move out of the village and one of them goes on, and the whole story goes from there. But it was built bit by bit. The characters appeared, first I get the characters, the situations, and then I develop the story, yes.
That's very interesting, because I want to talk about the setting, and here I hope you can sort of contribute to this as well, that this time when independence is just around the corner, a lot of novels have explored this setting and this time as for a sort of using history to sort of delve into the different possibilities. And what's also interesting in your novel is you're looking at this movement from the South, which is again a very I would believe it's not done as often as the North tends to be the setting for a lot of the pre-independence writing. So I was just wondering about what sort of fascinated you about this time, and clearly we won't tire of it. It's a very, very important and a very defining moment in our in the subcontinent?
We shouldn't tire of it, I suppose, and we won't, because it was not only an era of great importance for the country, but it was also a period when there were people who had that spirit and, that sustaining ability to carry out what they wanted. I mean, colonial oppression, we look at it from a distance and it all, in certain ways, sounds very dreamlike and easy and all these people with lots of courage. But there were ordinary men and women from ordinary families who became those, what they became. So I'm very, compelled by their lives and I find them important for us to understand. So for me, it has been mainly just reading newspapers and, just having listened to a lot of conversations about the freedom struggle from the previous generation, from our parents, and so on. So it has been a sort of a gradual assimilation of history, which happened to me in writing this book. But as I went on, I realized that there were certain facts I had to get right. And the more I read, again, it was been mainly from very few books or writings or maybe biographies. And I began to collect very important information of what was happening even in the South. For instance, a man goes to prison, what happens to his young wife, Yeah, and how does she spend that time? What when she's carrying a child and he's in prison? All these things are realities which people faced tremendous hardships. There was, in fact, one lawyer. He was a lawyer, but he finally was a Constituent Assembly member who, while he was in prison as a young man, became blind because of something that poisoned him from the food. We don't know whether it was intentional or what it was by somebody, but he lost sight in both his eyes, and he was a lawyer. And he continued with not only with the freedom struggle, but with law. He continued to be a very, very good lawyer with a fantastic memory. So he went on to be a judge. Yeah. So that type of thing, you see ordinary people from all corners, but it is a fascinating part of life. But at the same time, for me, the village and what happens in villages, the caste and religious and superstitious beliefs that we hold, and how people, our lives are affected by these. That is what I think, trying to see.
Would you like to add to that? Because I know that your own work, in fact, your recent book, A Touch of Salt, is also set in a similar time and addresses this moment in history. So what about this setting do you think is fascinating, and how would you react to what Kaveri just said?
Yes. So I think we keep discovering this period anew as we move further away from it, and we look at the times we are in, we start questioning why are things the way they are. And inevitably, it seems to go back to this period. And we seem to I don't think is the right word, but we seem to be living under the consequences of a lot more of colonial rule than we think. And the thought that we shed off British rule and became independent in 1947, and somehow it was like a snake shedding its skin. It's not like that at all. There's been lots of festering wounds, as it were. So it is really fantastic to be able to go back to a period earlier. And most importantly, as you said, go back to a period earlier from a location which we haven't read too much of in the context of the battle against colonialism and the freedom movement. Somehow, in the popular imagination, it seems to have been something that's limited to the north and the east and the west, but obviously that cannot be the truth. So it's also a great opportunity to find out more. And the fact that we are seeing it through a novelist's imagination actually gives it much more reality, if you know what I mean. Because then we get to those details which the history books will never look at. I'm like hooked from the beginning.
Actually, this is a good time to maybe read a portion of the novel which I think speaks about this setting and this time. And why don't you read for us?
I'm reading from an early part of the novel. We have just, in the second chapter. 25 miles west of the great city of Mysore and behind the arid stretches of land beyond Panchavalli lies our village. Here, mud is life. For 9 months in a year, the earth remains dry. Have a look and a feel. Give it a good knock with your pickaxe. Try harder. The rock-like mud will splinter into fragments of powdery earth. Run the soil through your fingers. Count the grains of earth. In the dry months, the fields yield a bit of mustard, some ragi, a few rugged creepers of cucumber, and the humdrum tondekai with its starry white flowers. In the long summer months, our naked paddy fields look pleadingly at the heavens. Just as the wells begin to dry and the 2 ponds become distressed swamps, the skies tear open and the rain punches down. Earth opens her folds to let the water bathe every strand of thirsting root and tickles the long-dried seeds to life. Fat rivulets of water flow in muddy channels of 4, 6, 10, 14 days. Burdened with moisture, the trees grumble and drip, turning the earth into butter-soft, fragrant, slushy, silky kesaru, the giver of life. The paddy and ragi will soon rise quivering, green-mantled, boastful. The 57 families in Kesarugattu will eat for a year. It has long been a precarious existence, and it has driven men outward in search of work. The family. This is about the family of Devaraya. So he works at a bank in Mysore, and I'm just skipping a bit. Kesarugattu was never woebegone or isolate. The people were not ignorant. We understood progress. Ichukaka's eldest son-in-law, who was an apprentice tinker in Hunsur, came every Sunday lugging a snugly wrapped bundle of 35 newspapers tied with banana string. One of each of the 4 families that purchased the newspaper waited to grab their week's worth. The 5th batch of papers stayed with Ichu's shop for free readership. But selfish was he who did not share a few moments of reading pleasure with those who were unable to afford 4 annas a month for their own copies. Men bunched in groups. There was order and some reverence even in listening. First page headlines to the last page sports news. New words were uttered aloud, tasted and digested. Khilafat, motion pictures, the Montague Morley Pact. The kangaroo, the pygmy, the Negro, God save the king. We knew all that. Men who could make nothing of the written word sat on the grassy slope and listened. The king has reached the shores of America on a royal visit. The queen wears a turban. Congress meeting in Gulbarga. Protest march in Patna. Turn the page. Boatmen's mutiny in Rangoon. They are sure to be hanged.
Thank you for that. I want to come to the other big theme in this novel, which is caste. There are 2 kinds of oppression, as I see it in this novel, right? One is the colonial oppression and the other is caste. This is set in a village where rules of caste are really, really sacrosanct. I wanted to understand why you decided to layer the novel with not just 1 but 2 kinds of oppression, and what was the thinking behind that, and also the fact that while one we seemingly got rid of it, despite all the scars that remain, but the other we haven't gotten rid of.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer because I do not remember or understand why I chose those or how it happened. I just created the characters and put them in situations. And then I usually wait for the characters to react. I have a lot of respect for the characters I create, and I wait for them to go forward. So caste was something that was very obvious, sort of a thing in the identity in the village. And it all happened because of the characters. But caste itself is a real problem. And while colonial, as Archana said, colonialism we might have got rid of, but caste is still very much a reality, the caste segregations. And I mean, the question, of course, arises why a person who's not oppressed by caste has to write about it. But I think it is a novelist's business to go wherever it takes you. And I don't think there are boundaries. I don't think there's anything that should stop one from addressing difficult issues and things that question our own beliefs and ideas about caste or superstition. Yeah.
Right. Arunava, did you also react to these two kinds of oppression that were there in this novel, which is, again, the fact that caste is, that there's this, obviously the unshakable, you cannot get rid of it. And that's like a persistent sort of running thread in this novel. What was your reaction when you saw these two kinds of oppression?
Yeah, in fact, I was very interested in the fact that there is sort of two simultaneous battles for freedom and autonomy being played. Because it's not just that caste is a background in this novel. It is very much an active force against which the family that we are looking at are pushing back. Even though there is acceptance, as Kaveri, I imagine, was the norm of the day, but the individuals are pushing back, and indeed the pivot of the novel actually rests around the act of pushing back against caste identity. And so in that sense, it's also a battle for freedom, right? But what is very interesting is that there have been other books which talk about people trying to break free of their caste shackles. But here you have also the shackles of colonialism. And to these characters, they're not analytically separating the two. It informs and permeates their lives almost as a single fused entity. So you have the two sons, for example, who are battling not just the caste identity, but also trying to take part in the freedom movement. And the two intersect. And that, to me, creates completely new space. This is the kind of space which, I'm not saying I'm vastly read, but I don't think I've read too many books that actually look at this space without seeming to. That's the other thing. It's not that you're deliberately making a point of, here's colonialism, here's caste, here's how they work together, look, I'm giving you a demonstration. No, it just comes very organically into their daily lives. So that to me was really fascinating.
And I think leading from that, the bit about caste playing a role even in the colonial struggle, I think that's an important aspect which I don't think has been explored at all. I want to go a little deeper into that bit about when you write about caste when you're not from, say, that particular caste. Is there something that you do when you set out to write it? Is there something that you're conscious of? How do you approach it?
I think having lived in rural parts of India for all my life, I have seen, sorry. I'll take it, thank you. So much water. I think having lived in rural areas for all my life, most of my life, I have seen the caste equation in close up. And I've seen it at every level. I've seen it play out in privileged societies and, talking about caste and the different gradations of caste that come in the subsex and sex, and even among the tribals and the other castes. My own community is a hybrid of tribal and migrants from the north. So we have so many intersections, no? And I have observed, I've seen, but not that I have recorded it in any way, it is just there somewhere in my head. And I'm deeply aware of the injustice that is there. I'm very aware of the injustice. And I suppose there is a certain feeling of helplessness because you try to do something and you're ridiculed, more or less. But probably writing gives you that one opportunity to do what you want to do. And I, that becomes important only later on. When the book is finished, I realize it. But also the fact that the book is predominantly about a father and his two sons. That is the story. But there are daughters. You see, there are daughters. And the book is also very much about the daughter. I mean, there are strong characters in the women. The women are strong characters, particularly one or two of them. And so that also happens, I think, very naturally for me because we are all aware of such people, such women who are, able to face remarkable, not only difficulties, but also the different stresses and tensions that are thrown at them. So the book is as much about women as about men,
May I ask a
Sure,
question?
please.
So I'm very interested in knowing, when you looked at the way the caste structures were playing out, were people trying to break out of the structure altogether, or were they looking at some kind of, vertical growth to move to the more privileged castes?
You mean in the book?
Yes, I'm assuming in your book, in some way you reflected what was going on around, or it may be an exception also.
Yes.
So in either way, did people want the caste system to be dismantled, or did they accept it and just said, I want a better deal?
I think it depends on the person. I've talked to so many people about caste, the ones who are actually at the receiving end, and very informally. We talk. And you hear people who have been utterly broken by the humiliations, utterly broken, and who have been transformed by it, sometimes positively, but often negatively. And you see those, and you see those who are determined, as you say, to climb up. They want to climb, they want to have the same rights as you have, at least, at a material level, that they want to have the same opportunities. But both of them are as difficult for them even now. I mean, although we say that we have reservations and we do things for caste, but I do think that the caste factor in India is very strong. Very, very strong. Even in a place where I come from, which is quite Kodagu, which is quite a progressive place, you would say. We have better education than a lot of places. We have, a lot of the social factors are much, much better. But even there, the caste system is quite strong and rigid. And people do suffer because of that.
I was also very interested in that you're not necessarily trying to play this as a representative of a social milieu, but you're also looking at the impact on a family. And that to me is what makes it's gripping, because now you want to know what's going to happen to the family and its members.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to get into that bit about using fiction, and this is also the reason why I think this point about using the family. It's a great way to sort of argue with history or look at what has happened already and interrogate it. And I don't know why you mentioned that right at the start also about fiction, the potential that fiction offers. You've been a novelist for so long, and what would you like to sort of say about what fiction has offered you when it comes to this kind of historical interrogation, especially when you have like the independence movement? Fiction seemed like the best sort of space to sort of explore this moment, right, in history?
For me it is, because I have always been the type of person who who blends the reality with something else. And even in my mind, I do have, although I'm a very practical-minded doctor, but when it comes to writing, and I do, my imagination, sometimes it may be bizarre, but I do rely a lot on my dreams. Because I think I'm a very vivid dreamer. I dream in colors and, I remember my dreams fairly well and I write them down. So I've filled notebooks with my dreams. Well, I've been writing only for the last several years. But dreams, I have always noted that they influence my writing. Suddenly some sentence comes in your head or a scene comes in your head and it may or may not be used in your book. I'm not saying you use what's in your dream in your book, but it affects that momentum of your, because don't forget, a dream is the only space that is utterly private. Nobody else can see your dream. So that feels very special for me, and also the fact that dreams are so bizarre. We don't think of something and we're dreaming and you say, well, how on earth did I dream this? So that seems to me such a mystical place. So I do draw on that inspiration for what, no matter whether I'm writing realistically or not, but that definitely propels me.
And you remember all your dreams?
I remember a lot. I'm not saying I remember all, but I have compared with, I've asked others and they say we don't, but I do remember. And I remember the colors, the people. I mean, there are a lot of things I remember vivid. I'm sure I forget a lot of dreams, but the ones I remember are vivid, yeah.
That's really fascinating. I do want to then get into the writing process. I remember we were talking a couple of days ago and we were talking about one of the characters in the novel. And I said, I wish this hadn't happened. And you said, yeah, I wish too. But you were in control of them all along. So I want to understand. Actually, at this festival also, we've heard writers who say that they plot their characters right from the start of the novel up until the end. And then there are other writers who don't know where their characters are going to take them. I want to understand what your relationship with your characters are. Do you know where they're taking you?
I don't. I fall between maybe. I mean, I don't think. I don't have a plot fully in my head. It slowly comes. I have a vague plot, and as it goes, it strengthens, and I might change it. But as for controlling as for letting the characters do what they like, that is a bit extreme. I think we do control somewhere, because after all, we are writing it. But what I mean to say is I create characters and put them in certain situations, and then I give them time. I mean, I do wait for them to act. That means I give them that respect that you have a character and you do what you want. So although I may not want it, I say, oh no, please don't do it, in my head, but the character wants to do it. And then I let the character do it. Otherwise, we can't create a variety of characters. We'll be talking, what we want that character to do. So I don't do that. So that's how I found surprises in my own book as I was writing, that characters were doing things I didn't want them to do. Because I had created them in that way, and so they responded to that. Yeah. So it's a blend of, there is a control, meaning the author is finally in charge of whether they put it there or no, but definitely we have to give the character that much space to tell us what they are wanting to do. Yeah.
How about language? And this is something I think, Arunava, you can also come in here. When you're writing about a lot of the dialogue, I would imagine, would be in Kannada, and there's a lot of sprinkling of words in Kannada in the novel as well. How do you write that dialogue in English, and how are you negotiating these two languages?
I really enjoy doing dialogue, and I enjoy doing dialogue, as you know, is mostly in our novels in one of the Indian languages. It may be in English, of course, which as an Indian language, but otherwise it is in various languages. And I love doing that because I do converse in poor Hindi, but I do converse, and in Malayalam, Tamil, Kannada. So when my characters talk, I do it in that language in my head, and then I write it. But it happens without any self-conscious effort. It just comes. And you put it down, and you might later revise it a little bit. But I think that translation happens in your head. And that is so important I think there's a strength in Indians, that people like us who speak many languages, that we can work between languages. Because we communicate between languages. We don't speak, you might speak one language to your child, you might speak something else at your workplace. I mean, it'll be all different, And the way you talk to a dog is different, Everything is different. So that flavor, is important in dialogue. And I like to do that. And I like using, Kannada is a language I'm very comfortable with. And I've lived and grown and studied till I was 12 in Kannada medium. So, and I've read, when I read the epics, it was in Kannada. So that grounding is there for me. And I like using that, yeah.
Do you want to add to that? Because I know you work very closely with languages as well in your work.
Yeah, no, in fact, when I was reading this, I kept thinking of it as lines spoken in a different language. And at some points, although I don't know Kannada myself, but I tried to figure out the rhythms. And it did seem to me that the rhythms were not necessarily those of someone who would be speaking in English. I'm also very interested by the fact that we are writing about caste structures and colonialism using a colonial form or using a Western form. And do you think that this form of the novel, as we've got it from the West, is adequate to cover the material that we have in a space, in a world where stories have been traditionally told in completely different ways? Or do you think that the novel is so ingrained in us that there's no getting out of it?
I would say it's a challenge, because the oral history itself is so powerful, and the different ways that people tell stories, like through songs and through dance and various art forms, even with illustrations, what they do, that is so powerful that to really have a novel compete against them is a challenge to me. The way we write, the formal novel, it is certainly a challenge. And given the fact that readership itself is so difficult, to attract readers, so I would say it is a challenge for us. I wouldn't say it is any superior form of communication at all, no.
Maybe then should we then go back to this moment about why we haven't looked at the independence movement from the South as much. I want you to sort of go back to that a little bit, because this, I feel, is at the core of this novel. The fact that these are characters hearing of all the leaders of the Congress, of national leaders like Gandhi and so on, but we're getting a very different perspective because it is simply because it's located in a very different location than we generally seem to read about. We heard a little bit from Arunam about that bit. I just thought we should come back to you for that as well.
About the politics,
about why we haven't heard enough from the South.
We haven't heard. I really don't have an answer to that. All I know is I had exposure because my father was in the freedom struggle. He was deeply involved. He went to prison. And he went on to be in parliament. So that whole thing I have witnessed as a young person. And so I do know a lot about the South. I know the people who are involved with him, as a child. But I do know. And I was a precocious child who listened to adult conversations, you see. So I got snippets at that time. My father never talked about politics much. He didn't do that. But I did have a certain bit of, I would say, home education in certain things that were happening in the country. And what is remarkable for me is, for instance, the period between 1946 and 49 when the Constitution was written. And that was the time the most violent in our history, of freedom struggle. the partition years, the pre and the post-partition years, which was so, there was so much violence, bloodshed, everything. And during those years, these 299 Constituent Assembly members sat down and wrote the Constitution, you know. And if you read the Constitution and you see how everything is addressed, you know, it is beautiful. And how did these men retain their sagacity and their, you know, clarity of vision and that stillness, you know, to cut themselves away from what was happening immediately. They could have been anger, they could have been so much, you know, they would have all had personal, some problems too, but they went on to write a thing like this and to produce a thing like this. That to me is one of the remarkable things about our leaders. I think of that and I say, okay, even at moments when I feel totally in despair about things happening in the country, but I do feel that we have the capacity in us to retain that, to retain a quality of thinking deeply and stilly and sensibly, you know, to work towards justice. How the Constitution was written, I find that another remarkable period in that whole history. I've got a brief portion about the Constitution, I mean that time of the period, but as a novel form, yes.
On that note, I think we should unveil the book, and Arunava, I'd like to request you to unveil Rising Suns. We do have some time for questions, and I do want to thank all of you to sort of sitting here during lunchtime. I know it's not easy. Yeah, do we have mics? Yeah.
I am deeply attracted for the title of the novel, madam, at the outset. My question is, I am from Karnataka, from the region which you quoted. I remember Kantapura and Arkanarayan, sir. My question is, whether it is a provincial novel, this novel, whether it is a provincial, regional novel, and another important question is, in Kannada, many novels about feministic point of view. This is Rising Suns. Is the focus on the sons?
It's not a provincial novel in the sense it starts in a village in Karnataka and then it moves on. It comes out of the village, it goes to towns in Karnataka and then it goes out of Karnataka. So second part of the novel is not in Karnataka at all. It ends in Delhi. The novel ends in Delhi. But Rising Suns, yes, the story is predominantly about the sons. But as I said, the daughters are also, there are women characters who are very strong in the novel and who do, defy certain things and do what they feel is best. Yeah, there are. So it is, people who are looking for strong women characters will find them. They are there. Yes.
Do we have any other question? Yeah, this gentleman at the...
Yeah, my question to you is, what is the central theme that you have worked as per in your book, and what is the best message you should convey to the audience based on your...
I'm hesitant to have any message for anybody, but it is, I would say, when you read a novel, you get a whole lot of things out of it. You can get pleasure out of reading it, you can learn a lot of things, and you can perceive a new way of looking at things. You know, it may be something old. You might have known a lot of things, but you look at it with a new insight. That's why we read novels, I think, you know. And there is a way of telling stories. I mean, people tell stories differently, but the way a story is told. So it's all a combination of all these things, which we hope as writers and novelists, we hope that the book stays with you, a book you feel like talking to others about, recommending to others, or reading again. The biggest compliment you can give a writer is to say, I've read the book again, you know, sort of things like that. Or we go back to books which we liked. So there is no such thing as a message. I don't write books thinking I must give a message, you know, or some sort of something like that. So I just write a story, but I want the story to be both based on reality and imagination. You know? Yeah. And this book has to have both. Yeah.
May I add to that as a reader? As a reader, you know, we remember so much about our own pasts through stories. And that is ultimately how we know where we came from. That's why a novel like this is so valuable in telling us this is where all of us have come from. Otherwise, we get too lost in the rhetoric and the argumentation and in the making of public heroes and public villains and so on. But eventually, it's the story of the people and families. So that's why this is such a fantastic book to read.
There's one more question.
And one at the back.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm in the beginning chapters of your book, and I really like it already because it's so evocative, and you know the rural countryside. You know, for me as an outsider, right? I come to India for fun. You know, I go to the big cities, but this is a very different world, and it also talks about a lot of things that you might not see in urban India today. You know, it talks about caste, and so my question for you is, how much is caste still affecting rural India today, and what you see, and what needs to change for that to get better?
The caste? I think, see, we already have laws which say that caste discrimination is against the law, no? It is against the law and you can be punished. But in practice, it does not happen. You see, and even in politics, I mean, caste is sort of a very significant factor. So how are we saying caste is, you know, you can't have caste discrimination, but we are already discriminating at a very high level. I think you can change things only from person to person, like each of us who feels strongly that caste discrimination is wrong. We should see where around us we can stop it, or where around us we can make another person aware that there is no need to discriminate against caste. You know, there are many different ways of doing these things. One of the things that Mahatma Gandhi said was that he once said that in my next, if there is a next Janmam, I hope I will be born as the lowest caste. You know, it was for him an assertion of saying that I am with you, you know, I am with everybody. So what I mean is that we should address, if each of us tries to address something in a sincere way, however small it may be, I think that would start the process.
We're out of time, but I believe there's a question right at the end.
Hello, many congratulations on the book launch. I'm very curious to know if you felt any difference in the writing of this book in particular as opposed to the previous ones, and if you did, what was it like?
Well, subjectively speaking, for some reason, this book flowed very freely. It was not, although right now when I wonder how I wrote it, but when I was writing it, the story flowed very naturally for me. So in that sense, it was not as difficult as it now looks to me. When I wrote it, it went quite easily. Yeah, I don't know why.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks again to all of you for having come to this. Please do get yourselves a copy of Rising Suns. It's a sweeping saga, and I promise you it's really worth it. Thank you.